Welcome to Who We Become, Life Beyond Change. I'm your host, Amanda Lentz. This is a space for honest conversations about identity, resilience, and what it really means to rebuild after life changes. Here, we share stories of loss and hope, of challenge and courage, and of becoming someone new, even when life doesn't go as planned and the future feels uncertain. Whether you're navigating illness, grief, transition, or simply searching for meaning after change, you are not alone here. And I'm so glad you're here. Let's begin. Welcome back to Who We Become, Life Beyond Change. I'm really excited for my guest today. He's someone who flew for the U.S. Marine Corps. He led, he served, and in 2015, when that identity ended, nobody briefed him on what comes next. The anxiety, the depression, the deep displacement of losing the structure, mission, and community that had defined him for years. Alcohol became a temporary answer until suicidal ideation forced a turning point, and the recovery that followed didn't come through traditional paths. It came through something that went to the source: self-worth, identity, and the strengths he had forgotten he had. Today, Garrett Biss is a retired Marine Corps captain, a TEDx speaker, an award-winning author, and the founder of Valiant Path, a coaching practice dedicated to helping veterans not just escape the darkness, but rise to their highest potential. His TEDx talk is called The Unspoken Trauma, and it's unspoken not because it isn't real, but because no one gave veterans the language for it. Garrett, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for joining me.
I'm grateful to be here and spend some time with you, and I'm grateful for these conversations that you're bringing, that you're giving a platform to, and bringing conversations that I think are very necessary, and maybe touching on some topics that are very important to individuals that they don't typically have the space to discuss or to think about. So thank you for that, and I'm honored to have this opportunity to join you.
Absolutely. And I just want to acknowledge the vulnerability, because I think you touched on it perfectly about oftentimes these conversations are ones that we don't have because we don't always have the language for it or the space. But by having you share your story and be open, you could be giving light or hope to someone else. And just for context, Garrett and I had connected after my husband Jared had spoken with Garrett on his podcast, Action Over Obstacles. And so Garrett's story really resonated with me. And so I'm really I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Well, good. Well, I'm here and I'll follow your lead. So take us wherever you like. I trust you.
Perfect. So I'd love to start with your really first identity after you joined the Marines. And so you were a pilot, and the mission, the structure, and the community were a center of your life for years, and I can only imagine really shaped who you are. So what did that feel like? What was that identity like as you were living in it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when I think about a lot of people that join the service, it's often between 18 to 22 years old. And in many ways, I mean, what we know, neurobiologically now is that in many ways, even functions or parts of our brain are still developing. That prefrontal cortex is still developing. And through that process, we really have an opportunity and an experience to really start to understand more about who we are, about how the world works, make some assumptions on how do we operate, how do we act, how do we show up, and what do we engage in. So it's a very interesting, kind of case study, I guess, if you will, to see somebody's development and the development of their identity and their development of what they come to believe and expect about life and about the world around them, when that's done in a specific environment or under a
Sure.
specific circumstance. So really in the container of military service. So for me, there wasn't anything. I mean, there were some abrupt changes as you adapt to this new culture and this new experience. But to me, I didn't really have much to compare it to. I knew, of course, it would be a lot different than when I was in high school, and the environment and experiences and everything would be different. But also, in a way, it wasn't that different from anybody else who leaves their home at 18 years old and ventures out into the world. There's a lot of change. There's a lot of newness. There's a lot of, elements of our identity and our character that are developed during that period. So, though mine was heavily influenced by my military experience, it didn't seem strange to me. It just seemed kind of, that a little bit normal, a little bit
Oh,
to be
sure.
expected. But I think that really sets up a lot of the challenges when individuals transition from the military, because a lot of the things that were norms to them, a lot of the truths that they really based their life off of and their actions by, they realize that they're not universal. It's, that
Mhm.
was something that there were a lot of elements that were specific to that military context or that military service. So that can create a really, abrupt change, an identity crisis, an existential crisis, and a lot of challenges. And one way that I often talk about it is kind of like a secondary adolescence. In a way, it's not very different than an 18-year-old who ventures out into the world for the first time, but you never really expect to have that experience when you're in your 30s or in your 40s. I think that with the newness and all of the change when you're 18, 19 years old, you're a little bit more prepared or expecting some of that. You kind of come up with
Sure.
open eyes as far as society around you. They kind of understand that at that age, some of the things that you're going through. But for a service member transitioning who is also finding themselves in experiences and environments where so much of what they knew to be true is now comes to question, or so many of the values or beliefs or the way that things operate, it really, it really kind of changes. Like you're playing one sport, you spend all of your life learning how to the rules and how to operate and perform at that sport, and now you're dropped in a different athletic field and you're trying to figure out like what's going on here. What are the rules? How do we score? What's this game that we're
Sure.
playing?
No, and I love that metaphor because it's true. You are at such a pivotal point when you're 18 because you're an adult and you whether you go into the military or to school or right to work, you have that grace that society gives you to really find yourself and find your way. But from what you've shared coming out of the military, we don't often give our military and service members that same grace to
Mhm.
reinvent themselves or refine themselves. And so, just to go back to your transition. So in 2015, you left the Marine Corps, and so can you share a little bit about what those first weeks or even months were like as you transitioned out of that military world?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me and for every service member, it's different. So sometimes, the reality of the change and the transition begins to settle in, many months before it even happens. For others, it takes some 30 days or a couple of years before they realize the kind of the profound switch or the changes that happened. For me, it was really a couple months leading up to it. So I had applied for early retirement. There was this short term kind of program that they had opened up as the major war efforts were dialing back, and there was this small program for early retirement. And I said, well, that sounds cool, and I applied for it. And then once I got my approval, I still had about 8 months that I was on active duty, and there was some a little the concern or the worry started to bubble up a little bit even during that time. And what I was feeling with or what I was facing was I knew that I knew the value that I had in the military. I knew that I had performed. I knew that I had, had expectations and had met those expectations. I knew I'd gotten promotions, various recognition. But even before I transitioned out, I began to question, like, does any of this matter out there in the real world? Like, does any of this translate? Does any of this value? Do any of the skills, any of the abilities that I have that I had to develop for this experience, for this role, is any of that going to translate to the civilian world? So I think that started to create a little bit of angst in me and kind of prep the stage for, when that transition did happen. And then when I transitioned from the military, as many individuals, high performing or type A individuals do, I just buried my head as much as I could into keeping myself occupied and keeping myself busy. It felt like there was this wave that was looming over my shoulder and it was going to crush me if I didn't keep running as fast as I could. Come to realize, many years later that that also was a form of escape or not facing a problem or not really analyzing or experiencing kind of what was going on. It was my effort to just kind of stay busy and do anything that I could. Um, and even through that process, trying to run away as much as I could from anything that I was feeling inside, I became more and more aware of some of the disruption that had occurred, and some of the feelings that seemed to be a little bit different. One of the first things I realized is that there seemed to be this void left inside, and I figured, maybe that's some grieving, maybe that's just an experience of going through change. But what I began to understand more clearly was there was a void from some of the basic human needs that we have and the way that I met those basic human needs. And often I think of or I talk about through this lens of connection, authenticity, and meaning. So I understand as
Mm.
humans, we're biological creatures. We have the same needs for food, water, and shelter as every other animal. But as humans, we also have some fundamental and profound needs for our mental and emotional well being. The first of those is our need for connection. So we are tribal creatures. We do our best when we're part of a group. We're even biologically hardwired for connection. Many of the positive effects to our ability to emotionally regulate or deal with stress or live a good life, experience wellness in our life. Many of these things all tie back to this fundamental need for connection. And one of the things that we experience, or many veterans experience when they transition from the military, when something starts to feel off or when they feel this kind of void inside, like I was experiencing, a lot of that stems from that lost sense of connection. This
Sure.
this sense of belonging, the sense of being part of a tribe, this positive identity associated with who you are and how you can show up in the environment around you. When that's lost or that's stripped away, it does, it's a major disruption. It really rocks or cracks or destroys the, one element of this foundation for your mental and emotional well-being. So the more I kind of fought against this internal feeling and tried to occupy myself and stay busy, the more it's like the thermostat kept kind of getting a little bit warmer inside as I got closer and closer to, some kind of internal crisis. It got to a place I couldn't avoid it much anymore. So when work and occupying myself and staying busy wasn't filling that void or numbing the pain enough, then I began to over relying on substances and on, some behaviors just to try to deal with that pain. And really the inflection point for me, and this is one thing I share in my TEDx talk about the unspoken trauma that veterans face. Really, the inflection point for me, and thank goodness I kind of had this epiphany or this moment that it kind of snapped me out of my mental state or my um, the unraveling of my mental and emotional well being. I had this one moment where I realized that I had been ruminating, I had been thinking about and contemplating joining the 22 veterans a day by self inflicting a solution to that pain that I was in.
Mm.
And the thing that really caught my attention, it almost started to feel normal to think about it. And that's what, in this moment of clarity, that's what really kind of shocked me. Like, why does the thought of that or how it would happen or how it would transpire, why does that feel as normal to me as writing something else down on my shopping list for the grocery store this afternoon? And fortunately, I came to this realization that, hey, that that's not okay. I mean, I think it can be normal. I believe, if we're all being truthful or honest, everybody at some point in their life, they've maybe had a thought about that. Maybe like, oh, I wonder if I could do that. No, I certainly couldn't. But you have like this, this reflux inside of you that says like, no, absolutely, I wouldn't do that. But when that reflux or that begins to disappear and there isn't that normal tension between like what you would do and the reality and and things and behaviors that you might do and thoughts of that experience. So that kind of shook me awake, at least for long enough that I could make some changes and begin to seek some solutions to the problem. So that's a long kind of unpacking of the origin story, if you will. But as my veteran experience and what saddens me the most and really inspires me the most with the work that I'm doing is that's not an uncommon story. The more
Mm.
veterans that I talk to, especially the more that kind of open up and feel safe to be transparent, they say that my experience sounds very similar to, to the experiences they faced after the military.
And again, I just want to stop and thank you for your vulnerability because I can only imagine, and one thing that we talk about or I've had conversations about is even with a conscious decision where,
Right.
you chose early retirement, you chose this changing of identity. There's still grief and loss
Right.
that comes with that. And, the fact that you are here to help inspire others, it cannot be understated the importance of having these conversations. And so, for anyone listening, veteran, please reach out to Garrett or please reach out to someone if you're having any types of, harmful thoughts, because there is hope. There are people out there who can help. And so, with Garrett, again, your story, for everything that you've been through, the fact that you're here and you're drawing on your experience to help others. I just don't want that to be understated, because I think
Mm,
what you're doing is incredibly valuable.
yeah.
And so I'd love to understand now, with your experience, you've taken this and you've built something really powerful. You've started Valiant Path. And so what is that? And how once you had this epiphany that you had to make some changes, what inspired you to move forward and really wanting to help others?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've got a 3 hour response to that, but I'll try to condense it down to just a few minutes. But back to, my pathway out of the darkness, really what I described to individuals. I only had maybe a casual understanding, or, as many individuals in our society might have, just an understanding that there's things out there that help with problematic behaviors or addictions, or however you want to classify it. So I understood that there were probably some treatment programs, there were probably some things that I could do to deal with some of the behaviors that had come up because of some of the internal darkness or some of the internal challenges. And not knowing any more about it than that, like not really having any insight onto what those different programs or support groups might look like, I felt this natural kind of like aversion to seeking some kind of treatment for the problems that I was having, because through my experience, through my eyes at that time, I realized, at least I believe, that a lot of the problems, whether it was the behaviors or the substances or the alcohol, I realized I didn't see those as the problem. I saw those as a solution to some deeper problem. And I didn't see how removing those substances or behaviors could be a long-term, kind of solution. Now, my views on that have changed. I can really appreciate now everybody's going to have a different journey, both into the darkness and then beyond it to wherever they want to get to in their life. And everybody's going to be unique. And I celebrate anybody's pathway out of the place that they are. But now I do appreciate how sometimes you can slow that downward spiral by making some changes or removing certain things. So, I'll celebrate anybody's pathway. But for me, that didn't feel right at the time. So and kind of with some curiosity that inspired, I said, well, where can I find something that feels like it is going to address, or at least clue me in on the source of some of this internal strife or this internal suffering. And unfortunately, around that time, I was introduced to some great coaching and mentorship that introduced me to a lot of the field of positive psychology. So this mentor and this coach that I began to work with, he began to share some things with me and invite me to do some exercises and practices. And through that process, what I realized was happening, or what I was experiencing, was a lot of the internal void began to close up, began to disappear in many ways. And through the process, what was happening was, we talk about that fundamental need for connection. I think
Right.
that our need for connection, or our ability to experience connection, first and foremost relies on the connection that we have with ourselves. I think of
Mhm.
self-esteem sometimes, I think of that as just having a positive self-connection. It's having a connection with the worth and the value and the positive elements of who we are. And the more that you are connected with that, then the more available you are to make those deep, nurturing connections with other individuals. So, really, through a lot of the work that I was doing initially, it was an opportunity and an experience of reconnecting with who I was. And there's so much there to unpack about, I don't know. I do all these like 3 hour presentations talking about from a philosophical or neurobiological perspective. So I'll try to keep this short, but by reconnecting with myself and beginning to see myself in a more positive light, then that helped me lean into some things and find some opportunities and begin to experience a sense of meaning and purpose in my life again. It helped me contextualize some of the pain and the adversity and the struggle that I'd been through as something that in many ways was was afforded to me for the opportunities that would come from it, not as a punishment, not as just some darkness that I had to endure, but in many ways providing me opportunities and perspective and experiences that were in service of me and in service of my life. So the more that I studied positive psychology and some things that weren't showing up in traditional treatment environments or different treatment programs, the more that the more that it helped me kind of grow beyond that darkness. And then all of us, and then all along the way, I was constantly kind of looking back over my shoulder, like, what the heck was that? Why are so many veterans struggling the way that they do? I mean, we look at the statistics, veterans are at least twice as likely to have mental health challenges or substance challenges, at least 58 or more percent likely to succumb to self-inflicted wounds. I was always wondering, like, what is it about that? Because again, I had heard and kind of come to the conclusion that, oh yeah, it makes sense that veterans really struggle with mental health because I'm sure it's all battlefield related experiences or some kind of, trauma that or mishap that happened, in training. And then the more I began to think about it and talk to other veterans, I realized, that might account for some veterans, but it doesn't account for most veterans. Yet almost every veteran that I've talked to, they had a very difficult internal experience when they transitioned from the military. It was the adoption or there was a major disruption there of things that seemed to be very important or that were very important to them. So with my own experience and then my own curiosity trying to connect the dots, I began to really appreciate some unique challenges that contribute to many of the mental health challenges or substance challenges that veterans face. But I was also exposed to and began to experience many of the opportunities that are unique to veterans to overcome some of those struggles and challenges. So we talked about, many different individuals. It's estimated about 30 million adults in America are going to struggle with some kind of, substance related challenge. Maybe they're not all at a clinically diagnosable condition, but there's some severe consequences happening in their life because of a relationship with some substance or behavior. So I understand that to be 30 million different individual stories, individual
Mm.
combinations of trauma or experiences or environments that led these individuals to some of the challenges that they're facing today or have faced in the past. If we look at a subset of individuals of military veterans or military service members, there's some similarities between their experience joining the military and then that experience leaving the military. But one thing that's unique about service members that's different from a lot of other individuals that have struggled with mental health or substances is that for at least some period of every veteran's adult life, they tended to have a very strong foundation for their mental and emotional well-being. They had a strong sense of connection, a strong sense of
Yep.
belonging, a positive identity, a strong sense of meaning, and those are many of the most profound elements that are necessary for this foundation of our mental and emotional well-being. And what's unique about veterans is having that strength, having that resilience, having that mental wellness, and then going through a transition that takes it all from you or disrupts that foundation. So with that, I really become, keen on some unique opportunities to veterans. So with with a non-veteran individual, the approach to supporting them might look more like helping them develop things that they never had in their life before, that positive self-connection, that sense of resilience. But with veterans, and many times, it's not about helping them develop something they never had. It's really an opportunity to help them reconnect with the version or the vision of themselves that they once had and then lost it. So that's another kind of nuance that I've understood about working with the veteran population and some of the ways that we support them. So that's a long kind of, preamble up to what Valiant Path is. So Valiant Path is my attempt at bringing some of the tools and resources and positive psychology interventions to veterans that have struggled in some way with mental health or substance challenges since their transition. And really it's an offering to help them experience some version of the story that I experienced or the journey that I experienced, helping them reconnect with the value that they have as an individual, begin to see themselves more holistically as the sum of all of their strengths and their value and their worth and their accomplishments, and fairly some of the weaknesses and defects. And this is a major challenge that I see a lot of individuals that are struggling is that, as our bodies are hardwired for survival, one component of that is when we are in a stressed state or when we are in a fight or flight state, we tend to become much more attuned to things that are negative or potential threats, not only in our
Sure.
environment around us, not only leading to some hypervigilance about the environment that we're in or potential threats that might catch us off guard, but we also become more mindful and aware of the the potentially negative things within us. So we become much more aware or attuned with the weaknesses that we have. We ruminate a lot more over past mistakes that we've had, and guilt or shame that we might carry from missed opportunities or from things that we wish we hadn't done. We become much more aware of those, almost to the detriment of our awareness or our connection of
Mhm.
the strength and the worth that we have. So that's part of the process, and something that I always help guide veterans through is, okay, I'm not going to suggest that you don't have any weaknesses, that you never made any mistakes. That's not realistic, and it's not true for any of us. Every human being has had some, made some mistakes, wish they could have done some things differently, and also has some weaknesses, some areas where they're not as good as maybe other people are. But that's only part of the story. The whole story is that
Yeah.
you are not just the sum of those mistakes and defects. You are the sum of everything that is true about you. And through a lot of stress and adversity and trying times, unfortunately, many people can become disconnected from that part of their truth. So a major, a major development that somebody can have is beginning to reconnect with that worth that they have as an individual, beginning to see themselves in more positive of a light. This prepares that foundation for people to lean into something where they'll find a greater sense of meaning or make a better contribution or receive more joy and receive more of the nurturing benefits from the connections that they have.
I love that. What a just I keep going back to powerful because it is, because the fact that are you're helping others see themselves holistically as opposed to just, I'm really good at this, or this is my sense of identity. We need to think broader. And
Mm,
to just echo your point, yes, we all have weaknesses, we've all made mistakes, but that's how we learn, and I think that's
right.
where the value of the work that you do lies, is for someone in the military who's had a very structured environment to move back and out of that space. That must be so incredibly disorienting. And so I just really appreciate the way that you are approaching the whole self, and really helping to build those connections. And the spheres approach is the framework behind your award-winning book. And so, can you? I'm not familiar with that, and so can you talk a little bit and explain what are the spheres and what is the approach?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this, interestingly, this is a book that I began to get inspiration for and began to draft during my last deployment, which was in Afghanistan in 2013. Man, that's so many years ago. It's almost half a lifetime ago. But the gist of it is, so I understand the world, and the whole message of this book, The Spheres Approach, is that I understand the world and everything that happens around us to really fall into one of three concentric spheres. The largest sphere is what I refer to as the indirect sphere. So this is everything that's happening in the world around us that doesn't directly influence or impact our life or our existence. So if you think about a news report or the weather that's happening, out in the state of Washington or on the other side of the globe, or a train derailment that happened in Europe, like these are all things that are happening. They certainly are, but they don't directly impact our life
Hmm.
unless we allow it to. So part of this, part of what I share is some ways to identify those things that are happening around us that don't directly impact us. Because at the end of the day, we only have so much time, energy, and attention to
Right.
invest in the things that are important to us. And I think everybody would agree with me that we wish we maybe had at least a little bit more time, energy, and attention to invest in those things that were important to us. Well, one challenge that we have, especially in our current culture and the 24-hour news cycle and social media, is it can connect us with things, so many things that don't actually directly impact our life. Yet, if we
Yeah.
allow it to occupy some of our cognitive space, steal some of our bandwidth, then it can absolutely create an impact or affect the way that we're experiencing life. The more that we're ruminating over the tragedies and the horrific things that are going on around the world, or things that are happening in celebrities' lives that we don't actually know, but we're allowing it to kind of enter our awareness, then these do have an impact on the way that you're experiencing your life. And there a lot of value can come from just being mindful of that. Like, okay, how am I feeling right now? What have I been thinking or exposing myself to? What have I been seeing? What has been influencing my thoughts? And are some of these things potentially things that don't actually directly impact me? And that, for everybody, they might consider the threshold between that indirect sphere and the direct sphere at a different level. But what I found is the more that we can kind of shrink the next sphere, which is the direct sphere, those things that do directly impact us, then the more energy and cognitive awareness and bandwidth that we can invest in those things that really matter to us. So the largest sphere is the indirect sphere. The next is the direct sphere. So while a power outage out in Chicago wouldn't directly affect me, a power outage right now in my city in North Carolina would affect me. If everything went out right now, okay, that would directly impact me. If I was driving home from work and I got a flat tire, that would directly impact me.
Hmm.
But there's different ways that we can show up with or relate to those things that do directly impact us so that we have the greater chance for a positive outcome, maybe a emotional outcome or an ultimate outcome from whatever that thing that is that has affected us. So in the book, I share really 7 different lenses through which you can look at or analyze any experience to try to find at least some element of a silver lining of anything that you're experiencing. And then the last sphere I talk about is the action sphere, and that's really everything that we can directly impact that is, that is connected some way to our life. And really it's a reminder that so much that in a lot of ways we do have greater control or influence or impact over things that are going on around us. So it's a reminder and an opportunity or an invitation to make sure that everything that we're doing that is influencing our environment or our experience is done in the best or the most positive way possible.
I love that. And, a word or a phrase that comes up through several conversations is this intentionality. So,
Mm,
how are we being intentional with where we're spending our time and our energy? Because, yes, it is so easy. We have so much access, unfettered access to everything all the time. But if we're
mhm.
not intentional in where we're spending our time, who we're spending our time with, it can become overwhelming. And so, I love the
Right.
concept of these spheres, just to be intentional on how you're showing up and where you're spending your time.
Yeah, it was really
Uh,
helpful for me just as kind of a framework to see, for one, okay, if I don't feel the way that I want to, or I'm not thinking the way that I want to, it doesn't feel good. Well, what is influencing my thinking? And then
yep.
when I really started to touch on this and a little bit of the backstory, and I share this in the book. So really where this idea or this understanding started to come to me. So it was during that deployment and we were, this is 2013, so we didn't have the internet connection I'm sure that they do today. So we didn't have much access to the outside world. Of course, we could email and, we could, send letters and such, but it wasn't, we didn't have the large TVs on everywhere. But one thing that we did do to have access was there was, I think CNN, there was some website you could go and we could pull up CNN and some other, kind of 24-hour news feeds onto computers. And there was this time I really recognized that like something feels a little different in our, in our workspaces where everybody is. Like the mood just feels a little bit more somber. And really got curious about that. I was like, it's not, it's in the middle of our deployment. It's not like people are getting more excited about leaving. It's not like they're dealing with the transition of just, kind of coming out here for several months. So I was really curious what it was. And one thing that I noticed was it happened to be like 2 or 3 major disasters that had happened back in the United States at this time. There was
Mhm.
a major train derailment, there was a major factory that exploded, and it was just like a 24-hour drip of like all the horrific, experiences that people were having, the death toll and the economic costs. And I realized that whether people were aware of it or not, like this was really influencing the way that they were feeling, the way they were seeing.
Sure.
So I realized, that I had this, this moment. I was like, well, if that's influencing so much the way that I feel, then maybe I need to be more mindful about what I allow to kind of penetrate my awareness and begin to influence the way that I feel. Because again, if you only have so much time, energy, and attention to invest in things, you also want to show up as the best version of yourself that you can do with some intention or awareness, so that you're bringing that better version of yourself to bear with whatever you want to be engaged in.
Absolutely. And, not to say you shouldn't be aware of what's happening, but just to be mindful of
Right.
around what you're consuming. And
Right.
if you find that you are starting to be impacted negatively,
Hmm.
then take a moment and reflect on why that's happening and what you can
Right.
do to change.
And that's one thing I encourage people. I'm not to say don't be aware of anything in that indirect sphere, but notice if it's something that's relevant to you or what you want to do. So, for example,
Yeah.
I run a nonprofit and we provide clean water resources to communities around the world. So, if you see something or hear about something and it inspires you to take action, well, yeah, by all means, because then you're also going to kind of balance that out with the gratitude or the appreciation that you have to make a little positive benefit at some place in the world. But if it's something you don't really care about and it's something that that's not really going to directly influence you, if it's just more news about celebrity breakups or, industry economic challenges with something that doesn't directly influence you, well, if you want to be exposed to that, then fine, but at least be mindful of some of the consequences it might have for you.
Absolutely. And so, Garrett, the concept of this podcast is who we become, and you've been through several identity shifts and reinventions, and so and this is a big question, but you've been shaped by a lot of different experiences in your life, from the cockpit to the darkest nights to the TEDx stage. And so, who are you now? As you reflect from back in 2013, when you were deployed, to now, what has life, or what does life look like now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, in many ways, I still deal with or contend with some of the main struggles that all of us do as humans. The difference is, I think I try to be more aware of it, more mindful of it. I try to show up in ways where I can make, at least not make situations worse, and hopefully make every situation better for my experience with it. And I'm also somebody that reflects a lot more on some of the challenges and some of the pains that I've been in. I try to, when we're in an ideal kind of grounded and present state, sometimes it can be easier to look at some of our experiences. One way to phrase it is from that like observer's perspective, seeing us as
Yeah.
a character in this game of life, not as living the experience as the character. So I think in an ideal state, I can face a major challenge or major adversity and get to gratitude right away, or get to curiosity right away. So that's something I'm always kind of striving to. Now, just like every human, sometimes I'm caught off guard and I get frustrated. Maybe it takes me a little while to get to that place. Um, but that's something I'm striving to do. And then also just trying to take lessons that I've learned. And if there's anything that I've gained, maybe the experience was for my own benefit. Maybe I experienced or learned something for that could be a benefit to somebody else. So anytime I feel an opportunity to share something or inspire somebody or provide some insight in some way that can be helpful, then that's something that I like to do.
I love that. And what would you say to the veteran who may be in experiencing an invisible crisis right now, functional enough to keep going, but slowly coming apart inside? What would you say to them?
Yeah, so the big reason I did that TEDx talk was I wanted to speak to the veterans who were going through something similar to what I was going through. And the main message behind that talk was that the transition from military service itself can be, and is in many ways, a traumatic experience in and of itself. So a lot of time, there's a lot of barriers that are internal battles that a lot of veterans struggle with. And a very common one is kind of minimizing their own pain or minimizing their own
Mhm.
suffering. And there's a couple different reasons for this, but one is, this comparison, like, hey, I didn't go through something as bad as somebody else. So why am I struggling so much? Is that just a reflection of how worthless I am or how defective I am as an individual? So that's why I want to share that message, because regardless of what a veteran experiences while they're in the military, regardless of whether they deployed 10 times, one time, didn't deploy at all, whether they were in for 3 years or they were in for 30 years, they're going to go through some version of that major transition. And through that transition, they're going to lose the way that they've met their fundamental mental and emotional needs, whether it's that need for connection, that need for positive identity, that authenticity, or the need for a strong sense of meaning in their life. That foundation is going to be disrupted. And because of that, there's going to be some challenges or consequences that come up. So, for one, I just want to
Mhm.
kind of normalize that conversation. It's not something that only people with some of the most horrific battlefield experiences are going to go through, but everybody's going to go through that. It's it's not a negative signal about you or who you are. It's
Sure.
just a human experience. If any of us were to get up right now and go run for 30 miles, well, except for a few exceptions, the rest of us would be extremely sore, maybe a little bit injured. So that would
Yeah.
be the normal response to experience after some event like that or some experience like that. It's also normal to expect a disruption to your mental and emotional wellness anytime you go through a major transition. Now, whether that's a veteran transition, that's what I speak about the most because that's what I'm most connected with, or whether it's any other major transition. Anytime we go through a transition that can begin to question some of the assumptions or the values or the beliefs, or our understanding of ourself and the place in the world, any major transition is going to disrupt that foundation for mental and emotional wellness. So part of that TEDx talk was to provide a voice to that, give other veterans permission to kind of see some things in that way. Some of the, greatest and really saddest feedback I got was I was giving a presentation to a large group of mental health providers. I have to do a lot of continuing education training for those that work with veterans. And there was this Vietnam veteran that chimed in the chat, and he said, I've been struggling with something inside for decades, and I've never really been able to kind of put a finger on what it was until I explained it through that lens of connection, authenticity, and meaning. So that tells me it's not just something that a certain generation of veterans are dealing with, or something that only a certain subset of the veterans are dealing with. It's something that many veterans are dealing with.
Well, I love now that we are at a place, or at least we're starting to have these conversations and
Yeah.
breaking down almost the stigma of talking about mental health in general, men's mental health, and now veterans' mental health. And so, Garrett, as we start to close, how can people learn more about the work that you do, and how can they find you and perhaps get in touch?
Yeah, it's a great. So I will share one link with you, and you're welcome to put it in the show notes. But I've got a couple of resources. Some are veteran specific. If anybody wants to check out that TEDx talk, you can go there as well. The website is garrettbiss.com/show notes, and I'll provide that URL for you to share. So that's a great way to get connected. You can also find me on LinkedIn. That's probably where I'm most active. And then for any mental health providers, whether you're clinical or whether you're peer support or recovery coach, if you're looking for some continuing education training or just some new tools and resources that you can use with veterans, you can find me at diamondmindtraining.com. I provide multiple live virtual CE trainings for those mental health providers.
Amazing. And we will absolutely link all of your websites and the information in our show notes. And so, a Marine Corps pilot who flew at the highest level that the Corps demands and then had to learn how to land inside a civilian life that had no briefing, no mission, no squadron waiting on the other side. Garrett Biss's story is a reminder that the invisible struggles of military transition are not a failure of character. They are failures of preparation and of support, and that there are tools, frameworks, and human beings who have walked this path and come out the other side who can lead others through it. If you're a veteran, or you love one, or you're simply someone who has never had the thing that held your identity taken away without warning, I hope this conversation gave you both language and direction. Garrett, thank you for your service, your honesty, and for doing the most important mission of your career, making sure no veteran has to come out or has to figure out the unspoken part alone. Again, we will link all of Garrett's information in the show notes. And for everyone listening, until next time, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and keep becoming who you're meant to be. Thank you for joining me today on Who We Become. I hope this conversation reminded you that growth isn't always easy, but it is always meaningful. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need it. And if you haven't already, be sure to follow, rate, and review the show. It truly helps these stories reach those who may need a reminder they are not alone. Remember, what happened to you is part of your story, but it is not the end of it. You are not defined by what happened to you. You are shaped by how you rise. Until next time, take care of yourself and keep becoming who you're meant to be.